This month, October 2022, we're dropping a photo zine and interview with UWONT Red Eye Mob and a Patreon episode with Lex PMS. The UWONT zine is all film photography, featuring AIDS, Too Much, Vane, Ruiner, Abyss, ASO, Bando, and more. The UWONT interview runs 12 pages long, featuring film photos not shown in the zine, as well as a brief history of REM crew. Both the zine and the interview are available via our Patreon and shipped to our Patreon members. The Lex PMS episode is also available on our Patreon. Lex speaks on what her upbringing was like being raised in the Bronx, selling all her belongings and moving abroad, her time spent in Australian jail and what the Australian system was like, her bail conditions, why she started writing graffiti, her artwork, photography, thoughts on life, and more. Members also gain access to our Patreon library with interviews from Lex PMS, Modus, Amuse, Dyke, Acer, Zers, Rebo, Bat, Ola, Sabe, Diego127, Dessa MTA, Wayne 1, Dual Risk, Host 18, Cash 4, XSM, Sake, and less, as well as videos like All We Got Is Us 2, Savvy OTR, and more.
Hey, this is Claw Money, and you're listening to Angel and Z, sponsored by Art Primo. What is Art Primo, you ask? How dare you? Art Primo is a graffiti shop that was started by writers for writers in Seattle in 2001, and they have stayed true to their roots for over 20 years, offering everything from caps to inks to paint to refillable mops. They got nibs, they got jibs, they got caps, solids, zines, books, and more. And their how-to videos and YouTube channel are legendary. Art Primo strives to keep their prices low and quality high, hand pouring all of their mops and inks in their Seattle warehouse, shipping orders on the same day, and their site is a source of information for all types of writing tools. Tools for what? Tools for the revolution.
Thank you, EWOK. What's up, bro?
What's going on? How are you guys?
Good. So I guess we were going to start it off with where and when did you initially start writing graffiti?
It's kind of difficult to say because I sort of drifted into it slowly through like skateboarding. I grew up outside of like Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and so me and my friends we were, in high school skateboarding and shit like that. And two of my friends went away to like work at a summer camp. I think they were counselors or something in upstate New York. And some of the kids at the camp were like little graffiti writers. They were like young kids, but were graffiti writers. And somehow they put my friends onto graffiti. So when they came back, they all had like Air Maxes and like baggy jeans and shit. And those were kind of running parallel to like skateboarding culture anyways. And I had always been into art and stuff. So I had seen, bits and pieces of graffiti, but back then in my hometown, like there really wasn't, like walls that I could go see it like in person or whatever. So it was just a series of like fleeting glances of it going through different cities like Chicago or, going on a trip to New York in high school, stuff like that. But it was always kind of fascinating to me because I knew that there was like something meaningful behind it, even though I didn't understand it or know that much about it. So when they kind of got put on and they had a little more knowledge, that was, I would say, probably the beginning of when I was actually thinking about it like regularly. And then probably that following, Christmas or whatever, I think I got a gift certificate or something at the mall, and I went to Barnes and Noble and bought like spray can art and subway art. And so I was like studying those things religiously. And from there, it was just kind of a series of events that sort of, I just got more and more exposure to it. I ended up moving away to college, going to the University of Minnesota, and they had kind of like the scene was a little further along than what it was in Milwaukee at the time. And so I was kind of at the point now where I was sort of understanding like, okay, there's tags and then there's kind of like bubble letters, which I later learned, the terminology was throw ups and then pieces. At the time, I think I was still kind of in this hazy middle ground where it was all just kind of writing on stuff, like I didn't distinguish what was what or like which discipline meant this and the appropriate time and place to do each one. And then I would say the time I moved there around, I think it was 1991. It's kind of coincidentally the time where the scene in Minneapolis was kind of starting to bubble. There was probably a handful of writers. I know there was. I just can't remember everybody off the top of my head. But there was a handful of writers that I kind of subsequently heard about in Minneapolis that had been painting like pieces since like the mid to late 80s. And then I arrived there in like 91. And at that time, there was a couple of like crews, AKB, MAS, and a couple other ones that had people that, you know, like I could tell they were like a ways ahead of me. Like they knew how to do kind of all the elements of graffiti. And so I was just gathering information, learning.
What year was this?
This is around 91, 92. Yeah.
So way before a lot of like the graffiti that's present online now and all these spaces that
this is
can really show you a bunch of stuff, I guess.
Yeah, this is pre-internet, or at least my access to it. Yeah.
Was the scene mostly freights? Was it streets? Was it like a bandos? Where was it seen mostly in Minneapolis?
I first started seeing it on the college campus because there's a bridge that goes over the Mississippi River. It's like a car bridge on the bottom and then a walk bridge on top. And there's a lot of tags and stuff like on the windows. There's a guy Meta that did these really crazy like wild style tags. And just different shit like that, like stuff that I hadn't really seen in person before. And these guys looked like they knew what they were doing. So I was just like taking it all in. Yeah, so that's kind of where I started.
Do you remember, I guess, when you first started writing graph in the streets and on freights, what exactly it did for you at that time period? Why do you feel like you gravitated towards it as opposed to pretty much anything else?
I mean, I think I was already halfway there just because I was always in art, and this was, you know, a version of that kind of checked a lot of the boxes, especially for the stage of life that I was in, being like, you know, teenager, out on my own, could fuck around and like stay out all night, and, you know, like it was sort of running parallel with skateboarding for a while where I was kind of doing both. But yeah, just I think there's something really alluring about certain things that, like, if you get exposed to it at the right time in your life, you know, whether it be graffiti, skateboarding, hip hop, you know, DJing, whatever, you know, even some sports, I would say, like, kind of have that same allure where it just kind of becomes what you want to center your life around, you know.
At what point did it start becoming like an all-encompassing thing?
Pretty quickly. I'd say by 93 I was like all in on it, like to the point where, you know, I would like skip class in college and just go to Uptown and like paint on the tracks all day. Like it was really tough to kind of like haul my ass to college and like do that, you know. Like at that time I was not very serious about school necessarily. I kind of ended up even going to that school just as a kind of just giving in to like my parents' wishes, because I wanted to go to art school, and so I kind of just didn't give a shit, and I was really into graffiti, and I would just paint on the tracks like every day, especially like in the summer. We would be there like all day every day. The tracks was kind of it was like train tracks that went, it was like below street level. And so there was like a bridge every block for about 30 blocks. And so each one of those bridges had a kind of retaining wall under it. And it was just kind of this like abandoned, neglected area where nobody really cared. There's a lot of gutter punks and like homeless people that hung out down there. So we just kind of had the run of it for a couple of years. And then that was kind of like ground zero for the Minneapolis graffiti scene at that time. And as things really started getting going, the graffiti was kind of spilling out from the tracks to like the adjacent like streets and highways and stuff around there. Mm-hmm. And that's when kind of the city's attitudes towards it sort of changed. Like I remember several times painting down there just in broad daylight, and cops would come down there and they would just watch us paint for like 5 minutes. And, you know, at first we were kind of like, what the fuck, should we run? You know, and then we would just keep painting. I was like, well, if they're not like slapping the cuffs on us right away, maybe we can just Jedi mind trick our way out of this. And they would just watch us for a while, and they'd be like, looks good, guys. You know, pick up your cans when you leave. And that was that. And then within the span of about maybe 6 months, like things started changing. And actually the first time I got arrested and spent the night in jail was over Easter, probably around 95. It was a similar situation, painting during the day, and we were under the bridge, and I heard these tires screech like right above us, and I was just like, these streets, people don't drive very fast. There would really be no reason for anybody to slam on their brakes, and I just got a weird like energy, and I kind of peeked up, and I saw a cop looking down on the other side of the bridge. And I was with 2 of my friends, and I was like, fuck, we gotta get out of here. So I grabbed as many cans as I could, threw them in my bag, told my friends, like, we gotta dip. And we started running down the tracks. And I look back, and I see the cop standing on the bridge watching us run. And so I kind of knew we were, like, sitting ducks at this point. And I ran down, like, 2 or 3 blocks, and I was just, like, exhausted because you get that, like, adrenaline dump, and then you're, like, fucked up. So I like ran up the side of the embankment, and I got to the street level, and there was a cop standing there, and I don't know whether he had his gun out already or it was already pointed at me, and he's just like, get on the ground. So I'm like, I lay down, and I'm on my stomach, and another one of his partners kind of ran, and there was like a guardrail thing on the side of the road, and the cop ran and kind of jumped off the guardrail with his like steel toe boots and like jumped like on my back. And the other 2 kids I was painting with, they're white kids or whatever. So like there was a very obvious difference between how they handled me and how they handled them. Like the cop like jumped at my back, and then like when they put me up against the car, he like slammed my head into the hood. They made me put my hands on the roof when it was probably like 95 degrees out, and it was like super hot. They stuck me in the back of the car for like an hour with like no air conditioning. It was fucked up. Like,
Do you remember how old you were?
I was probably like 19, I think.
And that was your first time getting arrested for graff?
Yeah, I'd gotten caught once before, but I never went to jail. I think I just had a little like restitution or something.
So what did you think? Were you like, yo, I'm about to just quit graff, or?
No. I mean, I think like it would have been maybe different if I was living at home, because my parents were pretty strict, and I don't think they would have been very forgiving of that type of shit. But I kind of was like all in at that point. I didn't think I never really entertained the idea of stopping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the relationship with like graff and the law is always interesting, because sometimes, like you said, 3 years later they would stomp on your back and like take you in and arrest you, but before that they like just pick up your cans, like it's no big deal.
Yeah, well,
and there are countries where it's still like that. Those actually watch you paint.
But even in New York now, like sometimes during the pandemic, like no one would get arrested. It seemed like cops would literally watch you paint, and it would be the same situation. Like,
why was that?
I don't know. Some people, there's like how gossip goes around graffiti. Like most people would say like they didn't want you in their car because they were scared of catching, and or they like. It almost seemed like they didn't have an order to arrest graffiti writers. But now, since it's over, like, some people are saying like Vandal Squad has the order to like really go hard. So like you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes is what I'm saying, with like the law and the consequences. So it's like you could have a situation like Hurt, for example, in like Pittsburgh, where it goes to prison. You have to do prison time, or like a slap on the wrist. So it's funny how that works sometimes, with graffiti.
What's crazy too is like near those same tracks, like up on the street level. I think it was maybe a week and a half ago, I was back in Minneapolis. I got invited back for this like mural festival thing, like a uptown street art festival or something like that. And the guy that invited me is super cool. This guy Joe Ellis, and he was just like, yeah, just paint pieces. Like he put me on with like I think 5 other dudes. Actually, the guy Espo, he was randomly out there at the time visiting Paisley Park. But yeah, like we got paid to paint pieces on the side of a grocery store in the same spot, like literally like 2 blocks from where I got arrested and went to jail for the first time for the exact same shit.
Were you reminiscing on this shit?
Yeah. It was like I was getting flashbacks of it, like when I was there, because it was literally like down the alley from where I got arrested.
So, yeah, that's what's funny about people like you who have been in graffiti for a very long time. It's like you go through so much for this one thing. How do you think that you've, I guess, stayed with it for so long when it has all this, like, maybe now as like a full-time artist you can feel like you, I guess, gain more, but there's a time period for mad long where you're just kind of not getting anything other than personal satisfaction. I mean, you're creating bonds and you're living your life, but what do you think about that, sticking with it for this long?
I don't know. I mean, I guess a big part of it maybe was I never really expected anything out of graffiti other than just I enjoyed doing it, you know. I never had any expectations of getting paid for it or traveling or anything like that, and all those things have kind of just gravitated to me, you know. Like I've been lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time and meet the right people, get, you know, a paint sponsor and get flown around the world. You know, I've been to like I think 28 different countries, just like all because of graffiti. Like I never imagined going anywhere for graffiti other than, you know, little road trips and shit like that. So yeah, I mean, it's been a huge asset to my life, whether, you know, it amounts to anything tangible or not. Like, and I think above and beyond everything else, just having the time to go out and paint a piece on like a nice day and chill out with your friends and listen to music and shit, like it's like therapy, you know. Like it's the only time I can really be like super focused on what's in front of me and not have a bunch of extraneous like drama, you know, kind of like interrupting my thought process or whatever. I feel like it's almost like a Zen meditation, you know, when you're in the zone and you're just like, the only things that exist is like you and the wall, and you're just trying to make something happen, you know. So
you mentioned earlier about art school, and when I look at your graffiti and your pieces in particular, like I see a lot of abstract, like coloring, like stuff that requires a lot of skill that, you know, some would argue you would have to go to art school for. How did that skill come about? Because I feel like your style, it has, like, in my mind, there's like a group of people in graffiti when they do pieces have like a certain style that you have, like people like Amuse 126 or like Journey, for example. It's like that certain style of piecing, and I feel like it takes a lot of hard work and like essentially talent or whatever you want to call it. So how did that come about, like that kind of progression to that?
I would say maybe the best answer to your question would probably be, I think if I had any advantage, it would just be because I was into art before I was into graffiti. So I can kind of like apply things outside of the world of graffiti to my graffiti, and I think it kind of makes it stronger. Like, you know, things like color theory. I think I've really been trying to push that a lot lately. Just knowing what colors to put next to what colors, and I got certain things I've been doing recently where it's kind of funny. Like the first time I ever did mushrooms was with Rhyme, and we painted some piece, and it was weird because he kept giving me mushrooms. I had never done it before, and I'm painting a piece with him and Trace, and then the guy Askew came by, and he painted sort of adjacent to where we were. And he was feeding me mushrooms all day, and he kept checking in on me to see how I was doing. I was like, I don't feel anything. I feel completely normal. Painting. Finally, like 5 hours later, I'm finishing up the piece, and I'm talking to Askew. Like, I stepped back from the wall. I had basically like, you know, signed it or hit up Cruise or whatever, and I was basically like done with the piece. And I stepped back from the wall, talking to Askew, and literally within 30 seconds I just start tripping. I saw this like it looked like a neon bar sign, but it was like kind of a choppy animation of like a puma, or like, you know like the Puma logo. Yeah. It was like the Puma was kind of running, but it was like a really choppy animation, and then it like kind of freeze framed in that like Puma stance, and it was just like frozen, but it was like this sort of clear overlay on top of, you know, everything else that was happening in reality.
It was at night?
It was right as nightfall was happening, and the spot that we were painting, I can't remember which borough it was in, but we're kind of on the other side of the river from Manhattan, And after we finished painting, like, this is when I'm like, it's really starting to hit me hard. We go back to the guy Trace's apartment, and he's got this dope apartment that like overlooks, you know, Manhattan. It's nighttime, everything's lit up. It's, you know, insane looking. Plus I'm like tripping my brains out. And anyways, long story short, so I had that experience, and then fast forward maybe like 4 or 5 months, I was going through either my Instagram or just photos on my phone, and I was looking at my pieces, and I was looking at all the pieces up to this certain point, and then after that, all my pieces were like super like rainbow technicolor. They look like scrap can pieces where you just kind of have a bunch of random colors and you just make it work. But prior to that time, all my pieces were kind of monochromatic. It would be like 5 shades of red or purple, and then maybe some accent color and like a contrasting outline. But I didn't even realize until that point that like that experience like totally changed like the colors that I was using when I was painting and stuff. Like, it just felt like the natural thing to do after that, but I didn't really make the connection that that was the thing that like sparked it.
Yeah, psychedelics are very interesting because so many artists have made a career essentially off of their experiences on psychedelics, incorporating their art with it and the designs and the colors. And we even talked to a bunch of graffiti writers on the show that like, what was it, EM1? He set off his like DMT experience. And do you still mess with that stuff, or?
I mean, I've probably done mushrooms maybe like 4 times. You know, it's something that I'm very interested in doing. Like, I was never like claiming like straight edge. I was just not. I was never got into drinking, and I didn't really care about like drugs on any kind of recreational level. But you know, I just heard stuff about like mushrooms and like DMT and stuff like that. Like my friend Casey Ortiz was telling me about doing DMT, and he told me something where he's like, yeah, after I did DMT for the first time, I just wasn't scared of death. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty heavy. And then that really like sparked my interest. I've never done DMT yet, but yeah, I never had an interest in like recreational drugs, like just partying, but stuff that's like kind of like psychedelics, or like more of a introspective, like spiritual experience. I think you know, they actually add a lot of value to your life, give you a perspective shift that you don't really get in like regular sober reality.
Do you consider yourself a spiritual person?
No, I mean, I'm essentially like an atheist, or at least an agnostic, you know, like I don't claim to know one way or the other, but I do feel like a slightly different connection to, I wouldn't say like God, because I don't know what that is, and I think that terminology and that concept gets kind of abused a lot for different political purposes most of the time. But just, you know, belief in things outside of your typical regular reality, you know, like whatever this experience of life is that we're all kind of existing in the same time and space. You know, I feel like there's something deeper than, you know, we typically acknowledge. So
how does that factor into your art? I read in some interview you're talking about how behind what you do, you should have purpose, you should have actual meaning and some sort of like higher motive that inspires you, not necessarily in terms of spiritually, but just in general, something that you're not just painting for the sake of painting, you're painting for some sort of purpose. What is yours, or how does that fall into play when you're either painting graph or just even doing stuff that's more on the fine art side?
Yeah, I think maybe I don't remember exactly what that quote or that interview was, but I think probably the sentiment had something to do with I saw there being like a trend with artists where it was kind of this parallel to corporate branding almost, where people just come up with like a character or something and they just keep mass producing it in different contexts, but it doesn't have any kind of like anything of real value or interest behind it. You know, it's just sort of like a branding exercise within the context of art or fine art or street art or whatever. And I think there's a place for that, you know, especially when it comes to like the lines are a little more blurry in terms of like artists working with like clothing companies or, skateboard companies or whatever, where it kind of makes more sense in those respects. But I was also seeing it kind of bleeding over in the other direction. And I think maybe at the time it kind of rubbed me the wrong way that these artists that were kind of just like more marketing people than they were artists, were getting a lot of shine in like the fine art world. And for whatever reason, I took exception to that. I think when I kind of step back from that now, and maybe even a little more at the time, where I don't have as much ego invested in it, like the art world is going to do what it's going to do. And I try not to invest any energy in getting upset about like what the trends are or what, the flavor of the month is. But I, for me personally, I feel like as an artist, we all have like a unique perspective on life and things like that. And to not draw on like personal experiences or things that are important to you, politics, or, it doesn't have to be, super direct or beat people over the head with it, be real. But I feel like as an artist, as an individual, like, why would you not express these things in your work as opposed to just like make a little character that you do a million times in a row? That seems kind of frivolous.
That's what it seems like, almost, that in a world now with like social media and like the influx of different creative outlets and different things people are doing, it seems almost the only thing left is our individuality and like the experiences we grew up with, and just our upbringing and everything, because no one has the same exact experiences as you in life, essentially. So that's amazing to incorporate that in like your art. So I feel like that's the only sense almost left of originality in the creative world with that stuff. Do you ever feel it difficult to kind of find originality in the art world or like in your work, because there's just such like an influx of people doing different things nowadays?
No, I never have any problems with, like, I don't know. I feel like to a fault, I do what I feel inspired by. And a lot of times, like, I feel like my work is it's not for mass consumption a lot of times because it's very specific. Like, I did a show at Known Gallery a couple of years ago where it was a bunch of oil paintings of like Klansmen playing basketball, and it had a lot of deep meaning to me personally. And I don't even know if like the people that saw the show got the point, or and the thing is, like, I don't like doing this faux like deep or like symbolism type shit, but it was more like a thing where like I had the idea just because I thought of the imagery, like when I was falling asleep, like a Klansman playing basketball, and I thought, like, oh, that's kind of interesting, I should do something with that. And I before I fell asleep, I like made a quick sketch of it so I wouldn't forget it. And then there was like a group show about a month later, and I did the first painting of that series for the group show, and it was like pretty spooky because it's just like the imagery itself was just like kind of fucked up. But I was like, there's something here that I want to explore deeper. And I ended up getting like a solo show at Known, and I kind of knew as I was doing the show, like, I'm gonna try and like knock it out of the park with these paintings. I was also learning how to like oil paint at the same time because I hadn't really done it ever. I mean, I messed with it in high school, but it was just a mess. Like, I didn't know how to blend the paint and how to use the brushes and all that. So I was kind of learning on the job for like a solo show. It was super stressful. I stayed up for like 3 days straight at the end trying to like finish everything. And I feel like at the end of it, I wasn't particularly happy with my execution, but I thought like the idea was good, and certain of the paintings I was kind of happy with. But where am I going with this?
How has it been being a self-employed artist, or just having you think you hear about that idea like starving artist, and it's we have a lot of close friends of ours and of the show as well who are pretty real deal graffiti writers who took a long time to step away from doing illegal street graffiti as their thing and all the baggage that comes with that. And it sucks because you see them and they have a lot of passion, drive, and skill.
Yeah.
You would think that with passion, drive, and skill, you could get along just fine, but it depends what your passion, drive, and skill is aimed towards. And if it's aimed towards catching 27 fill-ins a night, then like it's not going to do you very well, you know?
Yeah.
Even if you got mad style, personal style of like the way you approach things, it really won't matter.
Yeah.
And you hear about these people's struggles with corporate America and working a job where the boss does not care about you. Your peers around you who you're working with don't care about you. And everyone dreams, especially in New York. And there's so many people and close friends of ours who dream of doing something that they're actually passionate in. And these are creative people, but yet still it's super hard to find a way to do that. And you do not want to they don't want to get like stuck in the cycle of doing that. So what was your experience like that? Just because you know, I see these photos of 1990 whatever, and there's like a OG piece you did on a freight or stuff in the streets. Like, when did you start stepping away from bombing illegally in the street all the time? And how has your process been working as an artist?
I would say like I maybe slowed down on the illegal stuff just like once I had kids, but I never really like stopped. I think when I had my first daughter, it kind of freaked me out because it wasn't like, you know, I didn't know what to expect, and I thought like, oh, I have to be like an adult now and I have to do all that shit that adults do. And then pretty soon after that, I kind of got over it, and I was like, well, I don't want to set this example for my kid that like you just have to like fall in line and be beat down by life and just do a bunch of shit. You know, like I was like, the goal is be successful at the shit that you love. You know, like if somebody asked me recently for some advice about, you know, like this type of stuff, like how do you make a career around the thing that you're passionate about? And I just say like, for most people, I think the thing that you love doing when you're a teenager, just figure out a way how to make that your full-time job, you know. And the younger you start, you have less overhead, you have less responsibilities, you have less like people depending on you or whatever. Worst comes to worst, you can sleep in your car, or you can stay at a friend's house or whatever. You know, when you get older and you have kids, it's a little dicier and you can't do that kind of shit as easily. But I think just always have a plan, you know, like even if you can't execute the plan, like know what you want to do and put in a little time every day, every week, every month towards that plan, and figure out how you get out of, you know, 9-to-5 life and cross over into the unknown and doing your shit. Like a friend of mine I was talking to a while ago, we both worked at Reebok, designing stuff for, like, I was doing stuff for UFC, he was doing stuff for like, I don't know, athletic shit, whatever. But he had wanted to do his own brand and stuff, and you know, we would talk from time to time. This is after I had moved back to California, and he was telling me about like an idea for a brand and stuff, and he was kind of just like hemming and hawing about it. And I'm like, look, like just make your fucking brand, like just do all the artwork, make all the CADs, have all the shit ready to go. I'm like, the thing about life and opportunities is like, you don't know when you're gonna meet the person that has the plug to the factory or this, that, or the other. But if you don't have your shit together when you meet that person, you know, how many people are like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this. Like, nobody takes that shit seriously. If you have something you can show them on the spot, like you're like 10 steps closer to achieving what you want to do. And yeah, like he sent me some shit from his line. Like he started doing his stuff recently. He made this cool little line, and hopefully he keeps it going. But I think it's like, if you have a plan and you just keep chipping away at that plan, you know, take an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours every day and just isolate yourself, work on your craft or whatever it is. You know, any spare opportunity you have to like put in some work on that, just keep chipping away at it, keep that goal in focus, and just don't ever give up on it, you know?
Yeah, and I feel like there does come a point where you have to just say fuck it and take the plunge, because like, you know, we talked to your friend Journey Wyme on the show a little bit earlier, and you know, he's like a pretty good example. He was working as a scientist and then eventually had to say one of these, you know, something's got to give. You can't really do both. But I feel like that's the problem, is like when you have like too many. Now, I'm not saying that this was his case, because I don't think it was, but when you have too many backup plans, because you don't have like, I guess, full belief or full commitment into doing your thing the way you really want to do it. So you're like playing the safety net game, which it makes complete sense. Like, we live in this society the way that it is. It would make sense to play the safety net game, especially when, like you're saying, like if you have kids, if you have this bill, if you have that, you end up, but the issue then becomes like you play the safety net game for so long that for some shit, like for example, what you do, you have to straight up commit. You got to commit. You got to put your all, you know, like maybe people might see like an artist who's doing paintings and maybe it seems like easy work. And one thing I've learned through all these conversations is that there's so much that goes behind what you just see. Yeah. And like you said, like people in this country and also just in general, like they're going to judge you based off of your appearance. Like if you don't have anything to show, cool, you're a nice person and have style, but if you don't have anything to show and it's just all talk, it's just going to be keep it moving, you know what I mean? So it's honestly inspiring to have seen you, you know, do your thing. I've been watching your stuff and been a fan of your stuff for a very long time. I come from the era of graph where it was already on the internet, you know what I mean? And like I remember seeing like all this like the EWOK MSK shit, and it's really cool when you meet people like you and you know they've taken the plunge. I see that you talk about like MSK and how you get a lot of inspiration and influence because everyone's pushing each other, everyone's building each other, and I feel like it's super important to have that like family tight-knit crew kind of thing where everyone's on the more or less same page, sharing different ideas and helping each other push forward. What can you say about that crew? It's one of the crews that's known far more than the average graffiti crew, and that kind of transcends as well. And one thing I think is really important too is like the members also are known outside of graph for just like also art and creativity in general, you being one of them. What can you say about that crew and how you got down and how that all happened?
I got put down with AWR, which is kind of like the brother sister crew to MSK. And because I was like one of maybe 2 or 3 non-California natives that was in the crew at the time that I got put in, which I think was around 97, I have a slightly different take on it than might be factual or reality as it pertains to other people that were in it before me. But my perception of the crew at the time that I got in was like AWR was, from my perspective, was a little more prestigious because it was like, I think it was kind of like the older guys that were good at like burners and like did a lot of like really dope like style pieces. And MSK was like kind of the younger, more energetic version of AWR, where it had a lot of bombers and like people that were really putting in work on the street. I think at that particular time, like, and this is just from my perspective, I could be totally wrong, but I think AWR was like kind of the main attraction. And over time, I think a lot of the dudes from MSK kind of like, they were sort of like nipping on the heels of like the older generation. And, you know, 5-10 years later, like MSK was kind of like the main crew. But they were all kind of the same thing. I don't know what the distinction between the two was. When I originally got put in AWR, there was a guy named Bless, and he was basically he was very like gung-ho about AWR. For whatever reason, I got the vibe he wasn't as hyped on MSK, but you know, so when he put me in AWR, he's like, well, you know, we're basically like same crew as MSK, so if you want to hit that up too, you can. But it wasn't like a straight up like we're putting you in MSK. It was kind of just like a, you know, sort of sideways invitation or something. and I was like, I didn't feel comfortable writing MSK because the people that was like their main crew, I didn't want them, like, it didn't feel right for it to be kind of like introduced to me that way. I wanted to be like fully invited into the crew. So I was just pretty much hitting up AWR and HM, which was my Minneapolis crew at that time. And then fast forward however many years later, probably like, let's say maybe like 7-8 years later, we had a big 7th letter trip where we went to like, I think we went to Barcelona. Yeah, it was Barcelona. And at that time, we invited Pose. He was not in the crew at that point, but they put him in on that trip. They put in Arrow from England in on that trip. And I've been around a couple times when they put somebody in the crew, and it's kind of like this cool little like ceremony where you kind of get made or whatever. But I never like get a heads up ahead of time that this is happening. So I kind of just like stumble into the scene and I realize something's happening, and then I find out afterwards. And it was the same type of situation. Like, I talked to my guy Casey, and he's like, "Yeah, we just put Pose and Arrow in the crew." And I was like, "Oh, dope." And then he's like, "You're MSK, right?" And I was like, "I don't know. I don't think so. I was never officially like invited or asked." And he's like, "Okay, well, you're MSK now." And so I got in like officially on that date. But yeah, I feel like it didn't answer the question.
No, yeah, I was asking you how you got down, and that was definitely, I think, answered the question. Okay. But how does that crew influence you? How did I guess like being, or not even just that crew, but just the people that you painted with, AWR, HM, MSK, how did being a part of these people and what was going down shape the way that you paint, shape how you are, I guess?
Yeah, it did in quite a few ways. I mean, it's a trip because before I got put in the crew, some of my favorite writers were like AWR, MSK, people like Crush, Tyke, Eclipse, GK. Later on, like, definitely like Saber, Revoke, people like that. And just to kind of randomly be in the right place at the right time, meet the right people. And I got in AWR MSK through this guy Kept, who kind of went crazy, and he's a dick. I don't really get along with him now, but at the time he was going to the same school as I was in Minneapolis, and he was from Boston originally, but his parents moved to the Bay Area, and so he would go there in the summers, and he was painting with Bless. And then when he would come back to school, me and him would paint all the time. And at this time, like pre-internet, like we were still developing photos with like the analog cameras and stuff, film cameras. And, so the standard practice was you would trade photos with different people around the country or whatever. So when he would send back some of the walls that we had painted together, the guy Bless was like, "Oh, who's this guy?" And he's like, "Oh, that's EWOK. Like I paint with him out here." And so that's basically how I got on the radar, and they eventually put me down after that. But it was just such a trip because like, some of my favorite writers were in AWR, and like, it was just like really bugged out. Like I ended up getting invited to Bless's wedding. I think it was in 97, 98, something like that. And that's when I like met everybody for the first time. I remember seeing a like physical photo of like a crew meeting at a park. And it was just like a bunch of dudes hanging out, and I was asking Kept like who everybody was, and he's like, "Oh, that's GK, that's Saber." And I was like, "Who's this like this super tall Asian dude?" He's like, "Oh, that's Tyke." And I was like, "Whoa." Like he looked like he was like 8 feet tall, like and I had never seen like an Asian dude that was that tall before, but like he was one of my favorite writers. So when I ended up going out to his wedding, I got to meet all these guys, and it was just a trip. Like even years later, I would find myself, like I remember I went over to Tyke's house. He was renting this house, I think it was in Santa Ana or something. and him and Crush were over there watching like the Lakers during the playoffs. And you know, I just went over there. Like I had hung out with these guys, you know, several times or whatever. And we're sitting there watching the Lakers game. And then like I still get these weird flashbacks of being like, damn, I'm like hanging out with like Tyke and Crush, you know, like still kind of fanning out, but like you kind of get comfortable with people after you know them, and it's like, oh, it's no big deal. They're just like regular people. But I still kind of get flashbacks to like damn, like, you know, I liken it to like if you're into basketball and you just like find yourself like playing horse or something with like Larry Bird and Dr. J and Michael Jordan like in the driveway, like, you know, like even if you know them, that could seem normal, but you still kind of have that like that version of yourself that still kind of remembers like looking up to these people as being like gods and shit, you know. So
when did you end up moving out here?
I moved out here in 2005.
Because out here, I feel like graffiti is a whole different thing, especially from New York. There's so many different aspects to it, so many different things you have to worry about. You know, you hear about having to worry more about gangs. Even just the style of graffiti from out here is different. I feel like people here, and no disrespect to New York, obviously we have mad love for New York graffiti, and all of our friends. But like, I feel like people out here really plan out the spot more. You'll see way more rollers. You'll see like blockbuster stuff, more straight letters. New York, it's like throwy on top of throwy on top of throwy, or people just like, you know, doing a lot of tags.
It's just a landscape, you know.
You think that's what it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, you know, especially with like LA, it's so spread out, and it's, you know, it's not like compacted together where everybody's living on top of one another. I mean, I guess they kind of are, but in a much more horizontal way as opposed to like vertical.
How was it? Why did you move out here, and how was it living out here?
I actually moved out here to work at Ruka. I had a friend that was doing some artwork for them, and he kind of put me in touch with Pat, the owner, and I showed him some of my stuff. He was into it. I did a couple of freelance things for him, and one of the fighters that they sponsored for the UFC, this guy Vitor Belfort, he's like legend, Brazilian guy. He had a fight coming up, and Pat hit me up and was like, yo, can you do this walkout shirt for Vitor? He's got a fight in like 2 days, so we need to like turn it around basically tonight. And he's like, just tell me how much you want, you know, obviously I'll pay you extra because it's like last minute, blah blah blah. And I was like, okay, no problem. So I like stayed up all night, did the shirt. He liked it, and I sent it to him. And he's like, yeah, you know, tell me, you know, what do you want for it? How much should I send you? And I was like, look, you know, I just had a kid, so my kid was probably, you know, 1 year old or something. And I was like, look, like, I kind of just need a job, so like, I'll just give you this one for free. Just keep me in mind if a position opens up. And he's like, oh shit, you want a job? And I was like, yeah, man. And he's like, okay, well, yeah, we'll be in touch. And then he hit me back like a week or two later. He's like, okay, when do you want to come out? And at the time, I hadn't really thought it through. I was just like figuring I could just keep sending stuff through email or whatever. And I was like, well, I was kind of just planning on staying out here. And he goes, okay, well, if you want to work remotely, we can do that. But, you know, think it's easier to do this type of shit when we can actually meet face to face and discuss things and all that. So I'll pay you this much if you work from Minneapolis, or this much if you move to California. And it was basically double to move out here. And I was like, well, say no more, you know, like there's no snow out here. It's nice. And so, yeah, I did that. That was 2005. And yeah, I've kind of been out here pretty much ever since.
Do you remember what fight it was that you designed it?
I don't, because I was not super like, I had seen some of the early UFCs when I was completely like no weight classes, and there was like a
no holds bar,
no
gloves.
I had seen those when I was in college, but I hadn't seen it once it was a little more refined or whatever. So I couldn't tell you who the fight was. I didn't even know who Vitor was at the time, but yeah.
So through that, did you gain any interest into martial arts and through working over at Ruka?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm super into UFC. Like, I actually, when I was working at Reebok in Boston, I was working on their graphic design department for their UFC contract that they had. Oh,
sick.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, Ruka has a ton of history in martial arts in general. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's what's cool about it. Like, it's like they got graph writers making shit for Vitor Belfort. It's fucking
Yeah.
pretty crazy.
Yeah. Between like doing stuff for Vitor and one of my favorite ones I did is I did a walkout shirt for Fedor.
Like Emelianenko?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I was hyped on that one. I did a really dope Habib one for Reebok, but they never ran it. I was kind of pissed about that because it was really good.
So is that like what you were talking about in terms of tripping out over, you know, like you take a look back and you're doing these graphic designs for, you know, these people essentially, if you were a kid, you would look up to, you know, fighting in the UFC or seeing them on TV, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have kind of a different perspective on it, like as I've gotten a little older and more jaded about that shit. Like, I think when I was younger, being able to make any type of living doing anything art related or creatively seemed like that was the be all end all. But then like once you work in, you know, the clothing industries and stuff for years upon years upon years, I kind of got to the point where I was just like, you know, I've made 500 different t-shirt designs, and it's like, you know, like if you ask me who's like the dopest like computer designer or whatever, you know, it's like Steve Jobs, or maybe, you know, if you're a weirdo you could say Bill Gates or whatever. But like who's the dopest like t-shirt designer? Like nobody knows and nobody gives a shit. And I was just like, why am I pouring, you know, decades of my life into doing graphics that are like cool for a couple of weeks? You know, you get like a little thrill if you see some celebrity wearing your t-shirt or whatever, but I don't know, that shit is kind of fleeting. And I felt like that was kind of taking the place of like a real art career where I'm making stuff for myself and not for a brand or for, you know, some marketing purpose or whatever. And I guess maybe segueing into what you were talking about earlier as far as taking the plunge into doing your, you know, what you're passionate about, I would say I got laid off right around the time of it was like maybe 3 or 4 weeks before COVID hit. So I was already getting unemployment, and then I got like, you know, the extra COVID benefits or whatever. So it was just barely enough to kind of get by. But I think at that point I was like, all right, now's the time. I'm just gonna go for it. Like I'm never gonna get a 9-to-5 again, because it's a waste of time. You know, at the end of the day, like, unless you have something that you really love and they take care of you financially and otherwise, like I just can't see continuing to do that anymore. You know, like I think it's worth, even if I got to struggle for a couple of years, I feel like building equity in your own shit will pay off dividends in the long run, whereas trying to claw your way up some corporate structure for the next 20-30 years, I mean, you can get laid off in an instant. You know, and they don't look back after that shit. You know, you put all your time and energy into like working for a corporation, and they just, you know, chop your head off when it's convenient for them. So I'm just like, fuck that. You know, like I'm not gonna sacrifice doing that shit for doing my work. You know?
No, you're definitely expendable in any 9-to-5, pretty much, I've come to realize, because even me, I work still a 9-to-5. I do plumbing in New York, and, you know, I feel very expendable because I see what happens to people, you know, at work. Like, it's pretty crazy. But it's interesting because coming from someone from my position, I think that people that do creative creative work for their financial, you know, stability, I would think, yo, that's the best thing in the world. You know what I mean? Even if it is in a way a 9-to-5 or commission work, for example. But then, you know, we have like people like Lady Pink on the show, and we ask her, you know, what is it like doing commissions? You know, it must be amazing doing what you love to live, to have, you know, what you want. And she goes, dude, it's so exhausting. I hate my clients. I don't want anything to do with
like,
commission.
it's a job.
Yeah, it's like, it's not really what I want to be doing. And you take a look back and you're like, damn, like, when are you happy, you know, getting money and doing that? But it seems like you found your, you know, your niche.
I mean, in some way I can relate, like, because there's sort of like layers within layers. Like, even though I'm not working, you know, 9-to-5 anymore, I still have like deadlines and shit. Like, you know, I have a project I need to do for this person, or, you know, somebody wants me to do, like, I'll still do some random like one-off t-shirt designs or graphic design shit or whatever. And it's cool, because you get paid and you know what you're getting yourself into, but it's not like you have a anchor around your throat stuck there doing that forever. But I've been noticing like the more of these kind of like little detour projects, like even if it pays kind of well, it pulls my attention away from the stuff that I'm doing. And I feel like I need to be fully focused on whatever my own personal projects are to really maximize the potential of that stuff. And every time I get like detoured off, pulled in this direction, like, work on these t-shirts for 2 weeks, it's harder to get back on track with the thing I was doing. So in the long run, I don't know if it's even necessarily worth it. I mean, I'm probably still end up doing it just out of necessity for a while, but I'm hoping to try and cut back on that shit as much as possible.
So where are you at now in terms of your art practice, your career, and where you want to go from here?
Right now, I've been exploring doing these like abstract paintings. I have a couple of ideas for like solo shows that I want to do. A couple of them are abstract shows. I want to do sort of an addendum to my revisionist history show, which was the one with the Klansmen. I started working on a couple pieces from like an additional supplement to that show. But the one thing, like oddly enough, that I'm the most excited about that I've been working on right now is I started working on like a graphic novel, and I was never really into comics when I was a kid. Like I just wasn't that blown away by the artwork. I liked some of the covers and stuff, but I was always disappointed by like just the frames, because it seemed like they kind of just mailed it in. I don't think I really understood how difficult it is to do a fucking comic, and like you can't do every frame be like the cover shot or whatever. But I had an idea. I drew these. I had these illustrations that I had done. I had made some prints, and they're like these. I called them public relation assault vehicles. They're basically like these super militarized like police vehicles, and the windows would be open and you'd see all these arms like sticking out the windows with like shooting Uzis and shit, just like kind of real cartoony. And I was fascinated by like making different iterations of these like militarized police vehicles. But my friend that was printing them, he's like, do something different. Like, you've already done like 2 of these things. Like you're not breaking any ground here. And I was like, yeah, he's kind of right. But I still felt like some pull, like I needed to do something with this. So then I was like, well, maybe I put them in like a context where it makes sense, and maybe it grows into something else. And slowly it kind of snowballed into this concept for like a graphic novel. So I've been working on that for like, I would say maybe off and on for about a year. And I'm still probably another year and a half away from completing it. But that thing has been the biggest challenge and probably the most gratifying, just in terms of the scope of what I'm doing. I've never had a personal project that I've invested this much time and like energy and thought into. And there's so many facets to like, at the beginning I was just like, oh, I can draw, I'll just make a comic. But but then I realized like you gotta have a compelling story, you gotta have interesting characters, you gotta have good dialogue, you have to like have an arc to everything. And so before I knew it, I realized like, oh shit, I'm basically doing like what, if it's done properly, like any screenwriter or whatever, there's probably 7 or 8 people's like full-time jobs that go into making something, some kind of story, and like building it out. But the challenge of doing it and kind of thinking instead of just like a 2-dimensional linear way, thinking of it in like a 3-dimensional story, like that's been the most interesting to me recently. So yeah,
I think it's pretty cool how even though you've been involved in different types of art for mad long, you can still find ways like that to just take a different approach that creates a new set of problems and obstacles and things that you can pretty much learn how to do.
Yeah.
like I said, it's inspiring to see all the stuff that you've done and have been doing, both in and out of graffiti, and an honor for us to have had this conversation with you, and just thank you for what you've done, and also inspiring a lot of people to pursue their path, and your involvement within graffiti as well, and your contributions to like the history of it. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Seriously, man, it's inspiring, and I hope to see what you do in the future. It's gonna be exciting.
Yeah, hopefully.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, thank you, man. Peace.